Okay, it's 11:03. I will go ahead and get started. So thank you for coming today. This is about accessible sites. And if you're in technology, in web development, or anything like that, accessibility is something that we all need to be concerned about. And just to make sure, can everyone see my screen and hear me? Okay. Okay. So I'm talking about accessible sites. I'm going to show you 10 ways that we can test, implement them, and learn about the impact of accessible sites. Accessibility is everyone's job in an organization, down from the stakeholders to the lowly designers and developers. But unfortunately, the bulk of the actual work falls on designers and developers. An overview that I'm going to talk about first is you're going to see this numeronym, this shortened version of the word accessibility, shortened as A11Y, and that's because there's 11 letters in between the A and the Y of accessibility. When you see this shortened version of accessibility, sometimes it'll mean accessible, sometimes it'll mean accessibility. Depending on the context, it has something to do with accessibility. And I'm saying that now because I realized in this presentation that there's sometimes I use it as accessible or accessibility. So accessibility means that anybody who comes to our websites, whether they're internal or the public, they can use our websites. It doesn't matter what their access challenges are, and it doesn't matter what their access device is, whether that's a phone, a screen reader, or a giant monitor, or as you see in this photograph of a person with cerebral palsy, whether it's a joystick or a special keyboard. I include these photographs because accessibility is about the people that we serve. As the designers and the developers, we're not the user. We're not the ones that this is for. And by the very fact of our involvement in the development or design process, we are inherently biased. And ultimately, we want to have people who actually use assistive technology or who live with disabilities test our products. But in lieu of that, sometimes we need a way that we can do an ad hoc check of, of the accessibility of our work. An accessible website means it's a website that can be accessed by any device or any assistive technology. And we use, well, the industry has several ways that you can check a lot of things, but we use the ICT testing baseline here at the link at accessboard.gov. They have 24 different tests that they use to run on a website to check for varying levels of violations of accessibility principles. One of the first things that I want to say is don't use overlays. And an overlay is any one of these things that has some bug or widget in the lower corner that when you press it, some sort of a control panel appears to let you adjust things like contrast or text size. The truth is, these things don't really work. They may make certain surface alterations on the website that makes people who don't live with disabilities feel better about themselves, but the truth is they don't work. And the links that you have access to on this particular slide or in the deck, you will see that there's a lot of evidence that they don't work, and there's also a lot of anecdotes that they don't work, but they're still being peddled. So OTS is not going to use these whenever it has a choice. I've heard people, I actually heard someone, a government worker, no one in any of our teams once say, I don't know why we need all this accessibility stuff. They can just get some help. And not only was I flabbergasted when I heard this, but I thought, well, maybe he just doesn't know what this is all about. So I thought about the curb cuts, and that's the place where the sidewalk has a notch in it to allow wheelchairs easy access onto the sidewalk or down from the sidewalk. And these curb cuts were created, I think it was the 60s or the 70s, originally created for people with wheelchairs, but they help everyone. They help people on bicycles or people pushing strollers. So the things that I'm going to show you are also going to help us, especially because sometimes we may have a temporary disability or a situational disability. The situational disability will be maybe where I'm carrying groceries in my arms, and so I only have one hand free, and so a door with a weird way to open it is going to be harder for me to use. Or a temporary disability may be where, what if I break my arm and it happens to be my right arm, and as a right-handed person, I use the mouse with my right hand, which means that since my left hand is uninjured, I'm either going to have to learn to reuse the mouse with the left hand or rely on alternate methods of access. None of the things that I'm showing you is my own personal opinion. These are all from government, industry, or academic sources. And there's plenty of resources for doing things and getting statistics on this sort of thing. In Louisiana, according to the CDC, 1 in 3 of our residents has a disability. In the United States, that's 1 in 4. Across the entire global population, the last time I read it, that was either 1 in 5 or 1 in 6. Now, most of these disabilities in people of Louisiana who have disabilities tends to be motor or cognitive disabilities. Motor typically means something to do with motion, their hands or movement. Cognitive means that they have certain challenges when it comes to thinking or concentrating or prolonged periods of mental activity. I'm going to show you a couple of tools here, but this is not really going to be about the tools, but I recommend that you look at these, and some of them are easier to use than others. Some are bookmarklets, some are browser extensions, and some are actually applications that you can download and install. And I want to point out that just because a tool says that there's a violation doesn't mean that it's necessarily a violation. There can be false positives or false negatives. In the end, it's going to take a human being to evaluate the situation. But these automated tools are great at catching low-hanging fruit such as badly formatted attributes or missing attributes. And trying to get it to go forward, sorry. Okay, so to the good stuff. And after number 10, I'm going to show you something that I've only recently learned. So I had to do a quick addition to this slide deck. The first strategy we have is requiring. This is not a nice to have, this is a fundamental requirement. And it's the first thing that accessibility professionals check for, and that is keyboard access and obvious focus styles. And I'm going to demonstrate that. The second thing is to write content with proper headings and plain language. And I know Ricky's in here, so Ricky is always peering over our shoulders to make sure that we have done that. Proper headings means a properly structured document using your heading tags from H1 to 6, as well as certain other things. Number 3 is when we use forms, we always include a label for the form control, and the label is always programmatically associated with the control. Number 4, we write links to make sense out of context. So we avoid click here or read more. We always write the link text in a way that it will make sense in a screen reader, and I'm going to demonstrate that as well. We choose proper contrast for text and user interface elements, and Shauna, I know you were mentioning that when you first joined this, so good on you. Number 6, putting the same navigation on all pages. I realize that probably sounds self-evident, But in a recent evaluation of 17 Louisiana state government websites, I actually discovered a couple of agencies that would, for some reason or another, omit the navigation on certain parts of their website. Number 7, we add description text, also known as alt text, for all images, whether they're necessary or not. And I'll show you that. Number 8, we're going to make sure that text is resizable up to 200% using the browser's native zoom function. Number 9, we need to have alternate or multiple ways for people to navigate around the site. That could be a search, that could be a sitemap, it could be a footer full of lots of links. But something that I've seen a lot is that a human readable sitemap is something that tends to be used by people, especially those who need screen readers. And in number 10, we're going to use real semantic HTML. We're not going to include a div that's clickable because of JavaScript. And I'm going to show you something about that too. Okay, so now I'm going to show you these 10 things. To show you these 10 things, I have a fake website that I've built. You can get it on GitHub. You'll have to install 11D and NPM. And there's a link where you can get a download for NVDA for Windows, which is a free screen reader, which stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access. Interesting tidbit, NVDA is itself created and maintained by blind Windows developers. All right, so moving on. Is the site, here's 10 questions you should be asking yourself. Is the site keyboard operable, and does it have clearly visible focus indicators? People use the keyboard tab key to navigate the page, and as I told you before, it is the most fundamental check that accessibility professionals look for. The tab order should be logical. You should see a focus indicator where the keyboard is located, and that focus indicator should be clearly visible. And the first item on the page, the first interactive item, should be a skip link. So I'm going to show you an example here. So here is Chrome. I'm going to refresh just to make sure. I'm going to press the tab key, and the first thing you should see in the upper left-hand corner is the skip to main content. This is necessary because it allows people who use assistive technology or who are keyboard reliant to jump beyond the navigation. And I'll show you why. I'll press tab again, and the next thing that I'm at is the logo, which is a link back to the home page. I'll press tab again. Can everyone see the focus indicator? Oh, okay. So as I keep doing this, and I'm just tabbing around, and as I tab, you'll notice that the focus indicator's color changes. That's not a bad thing. In fact, sometimes you may have to change the style of the focus indicator to ensure visibility. So here's the focus indicator, and it's clearly visible, and you notice that as I'm tabbing around, it's going from left to right, top to bottom. All right, moving on to the next. Let me scroll back to the top so I can reset that for the next slide. Going back to the deck. What's the impact of ensuring keyboard accessibility? Is that if you can't use a mouse, you can still use the website. And that for some people who have vision deficiencies, the focus indicator serves as a reinforcement for where they're clicking on a page. If they are able to use a mouse, but they have vision deficiencies, it's an extra cue about where they've clicked. Number 2, are the headings logical and conformant to specs? The W3C has very strict rules about this, and that is 1 H1 per page. I know recently in the past few years there was advice that you could have 2 or 3 or 4. That has been disregarded. The H1 should match the page's title although you can leave out the name of the site. And everything that follows after that should be H2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s in a logical nesting order. Let me go back and show you that. I have a tool, the headings bookmarklet. When I press the headings bookmarklet, it shows me the H1 of the page as the soap sample pack, the H2 about the product, and so on. Now, you may decide that your site needs to have a different content structure, and that's fine, but it should be designated by the pages sections should be preceded or contained within, or okay, not inside the tag, but they should be marked by heading tags. So I'm going to show you this how this carries out in practice for someone who uses a screen reader. Now I have here Firefox, and I'm using Firefox in Windows because Firefox is the browser that pairs best with NVDA. Now I'm going to start NVDA. You won't hear it in this meeting because for some reason Teams doesn't capture the sound that comes from the screen readers, but you will see a visual representation of what the screen reader is doing. So I'm starting NVDA. It's giving me a welcome message. I'm going to press OK. I'm going to show you this thing here. The speech viewer offers a textual representation of what NVDA is actually speaking to me. So on this page, what I want to look for is the headings. The H1s, 2s, well, the H1, the 2s, 3s, 4s, and so on. So I'm going to call up something called the element list in NVDA. This is something the NVDA user can use to navigate around the site by either going to the links, headings, and other things, but for now I'm going to show you the headings. What we start off with is the name of the page, the level 2 items, about the product, related items, and reviews, and then the level 3 items are those items which are under reviews. So as the user of NVDA, I could press Home Furnishings and then move to. Now, I'm going to move this out of the way. And it jumped to the H3 of Home Furnishings. I'm now going to stop NVDA because it's talking a lot in my earbuds right now. And I'll turn this on again for another part of this. Okay, but what you've seen is how people who use screen readers can use headings to navigate a page. Well, another benefit is that sighted users have visual cues about what's on a page, usually the larger, bolder text. Now, what's important here is that a P tag with a style equals 36 pixels bold is not the same thing as a heading tag. It will not communicate itself as a heading to a screen reader, which means if you're relying on visual characteristics to visually mark this as a heading, you're actually going to be excluding people. And we don't want to exclude people. Number 3, do the form fields have code-connected labels? Now, some of you have probably heard me say this before, and I'm sure all of you already know this, but this is a common thing. So to show you that, we're going to go into Chrome this time. I'm going to close this. The quickest way to determine if the label is programmatically connected to the field is by clicking the label. So I have a select here, and I'm going to click quantity. When I click quantity, the label gets keyboard focus. That means that the for attribute of the label, which in this case is QTY, matches the ID attribute of the select. That's a good sign. The impact that code-connected labels have is that people who are unable to use a mouse have a larger tap area with which to activate that control. Screen readers can also read the label and they can tell the user, hey, this label goes with this control, and here's how you know what this control is for. Further, the field gets what's called its accessible name from the label, which allows the assistive technology to identify the control and what its purpose is. It's also future friendly because future versions of assistive technology are based upon some of the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines standards. Do the links make sense when they're read out of context? I don't know what sites you read for fun, gaming or news or movie or music sites, but often you'll have a snippet of a list of articles on this site, and it'll present something such as click here or read more. That makes sense to a sighted user because we have visual proximity to associate that click here or that read more. But it does not make sense in a screen reader. And I've actually seen a number of state government websites where only the word here is the link. It's as if they're trying to make it as physically small as possible, and in a screen reader, it doesn't tell the user what it does. So I'm going to come back to NVD. Actually, this time I'm going to show you something called VoiceOver, which is the screen reader that comes built into Mac OS and iOS. So here I'm going to open VoiceOver. You won't hear anything, but you'll see visual things on the screen. So here is VoiceOver. I'm going to open up VoiceOver's equivalent of the elements list from NVDA, and I'm going to move this over so we can see a little more. And here we have non-visited links. Notice that all of these links, as I highlight them, the link's text describes to the user where they will take the user. Oops, I went the wrong one. While I don't have any examples here of simply using read more or click here, hopefully it makes sense to you now, seeing how a screen reader presents a list of links, how the wording or the phrasing of the link or the button will go a long way in communicating the purpose of that link, or I'm sorry, the purpose of the button and the destination of the link. And I don't think I wrote this slide very well, but and I'll change this. The impact of well-written links is that it gives the user more context. And because screen reader users would have to consume a page linearly and within a textual sequence, we give them a way to more quickly jump around the page to look for the link or button which is most related to the task they want to complete. Number 5, is the color contrast conformant to specs? Really quickly, normal text, which is body text, should have a 4.5:1 contrast ratio. If you can get 7:1, that's even better. Sometimes that's hard with brand colors or something, I know, but 7:1 is better, but 4.5:1 is required. UI elements such as form fields or buttons should have a contrast of 3:1 between themselves and their background, or the background against which they're placed. Text can have a 3:1 contrast if it's bold and larger than if it's both 24 pixels or larger and bold. And I'm going to show you a tool that I use called the Color Contrast Analyzer. So this tool is a free tool, and I've got a link to this in the deck. So I'm going to click the eyedropper. I'm going to click this background. I'm going to click this eyedropper, and I'm going to click the border on the select. And as you see right here, I have a color contrast ratio of 3.2 to 1. This means this is good for UI items, which it tells you here, but this would not be good for regular text. And this would not be good for certain situations where you must have higher contrast. But it's fine as large text, and it's fine as a UI item. I'm going to quit this now because we won't need it again. And the impact of this is that it's easier for everyone to read. I myself have to use reading glasses, so I have assistive technology that I use every day. Makes it easier for people to distinguish between background and text, or background and user interface item, such as form fields, menus, etc. And I know this one we mentioned should be self-evident, but it's not. And I won't mention the state agencies which have done this, but is the site navigation in the same place on every page all of the time, no matter what? Sometimes it isn't. There may be e-commerce sites which have which have a landing page where they want you to take a specific action, such as signing up for a newsletter. And Amazon does this in the shopping cart. They remove the navigation when you're in the checkout process because they want to remove all distractions, because they want to funnel you through the action they want you to complete. This government site had no actions and had no funnels or conversion sequences. They just neglected to add the navigation. Now, there's an exception to this. If you have, say, a wizard or a process which must be walked through, you can ignore this one. But even in those processes, the user still needs to have a way to exit the process. And I'm not going to show you examples of navigation because I think I'm assuming here, and someone correct me if you don't know what consistent navigation is, but I'm assuming we should all know about that. Number 7, do images have alternative text on them? We're going to go back to the fake website. And here in this fake website, we're going to actually take that back. Yeah, I'm going to do this in Chrome, sorry. So I have images of soap, I have images of other soap, and I have images of people who have reviewed the soap. And one of the tools that I have available in the deck is an image alt text checker, but it doesn't work on local files, so I'm going to have to do this the old school way with the inspector. So the rule of thumb is if you need an image to understand the content, it should have non-empty alt text. But if the image is decorative or it's not part of the content, then it needs to have empty alt text. And I'm going to show you this here. So here's soap. I'm going to inspect the soap. And there's the image tag. And the alt text is, and I'm going to mispronounce this because it's a French word I've never heard, Miguel scented soap on a bathroom counter. You may say, well, Israel, that's not great alt text, and that's fair. Rule of thumb for writing alt text is, how would you describe a room to someone when you first walk into the room? Well, we're going to scroll down a little further on this page to the reviews. For the purpose of this, I've decided that we don't need alt text on the reviewers' faces. And so I still have the alt attribute, but it's empty. It is literally coded as alt equals quote quote with nothing in there. By having an empty alt empty alt attribute, alt equals quote quote, you're telling the screen reader you can ignore this image. If you don't put that in there, the screen reader will actually read the file name. And that's not really going to make sense, especially in a situation where image file names are programmatically generated. And the impact of images with and without alt text is that if you have a data connection problem, you can still get the alt text, and so you can still extract some meaning from the image. The assistive technology can read the contents of the alt text to its user to describe the image, so they can still get value from the image. This also means that search engines can use the alt text to help determine the relevance of a page on the user's search query. Number 8, is text resizable up to 200% with full functionality? Now, what that means is there should not be a horizontal scroll bar. Now, text and things can wrap, but no horizontal scroll bar unless maybe it's inside of a small scrollable section within that page. But scrollable sections within a page on a touch screen for someone using the screen reader on their touch screen is problematic. In general, we want to avoid those. So we're going to go to Chrome, and the test I'm going to show you here, this is a method that is acceptable according to Section 508 standards since I last read those. So I'm going to refresh this page. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command 0 or on Windows, Control 0 to put everything at 100%. I'm now going to use the browser's default built-in text zoom, the browser's default zoom functionality. On my keyboard, I'm holding Command and I'll be pressing plus. On Windows, it's Control plus. And I'm going to keep going up to 200%. You'll notice that now it appears like a magnified version of a mobile view, but as I mentioned, this is acceptable. And so we're going to scroll down to see if everything is still readable and usable, and we don't want horizontal scroll bars. And it looks as if everything does work. In fact, Chrome can even go up to 500%. So if I put this in 500%, everything still works and it's still usable. Now it's much larger. We're going to have to scroll longer, but this will still be usable and accessible, even if some of our stakeholders might start crying on the inside because they're afraid that the site is always going to look this way. I'm now going to press Command 0 on my keyboard to bring this back to 100% zoom. The impact of this resizable text up to 200% is that people with low vision can set the text to the size that they want, and the website is still usable. There is assistive technology called screen magnifiers. Now, these are third-party apps or plugins which by default start the screen magnification at 400%. Now, that has its own methods of magnifying the screen, but there are some cases where some people need really high contrast and everything on the browser zoomed up to something like 200 and 300%. The Section 508 test, which is why I'm going up to 200%, covers most of those, and it acts as a great litmus to ensure that even up to 400%, people could still use and read the site. Number 9, are there multiple ways to navigate the site? I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. For some users, if everything is only in, let's say, the top nav and everything is under a hover, which a hover only nav is problematic for keyboard users unless that hover only nav also works on focus, or for screen reader users for screen reader users on a mobile device where there is no hover, as in hover does not exist at all. You are effectively locking them out of navigating to certain places on the website. So you might consider adding a search bar that's early in the tab order for keyboard users. You might consider adding a human readable sitemap. You may even consider adding something in the footer which lists all the links. So for this example site here, I'll now switch over to Windows 11 and Firefox, and I'll scroll to the bottom. I have elected for the case for this demonstration to put all of the sections of this e-commerce site with all of their individual categories. Now, I could have taken this further by adding, which I did here, I added a human readable sitemap, which would have all of the even lower levels. Some may argue that that may be too many links on a page, but there are some people who will actually need this level of control to see everything, because they don't have to navigate, they don't have to dig through menus, they don't have to touch around on a screen. They can go to the human readable sitemap or a search and find where they need to go. And the impact of this is that, again, they may not always have someone to help them. They may not always have, say their grandchild or their spouse or a friend to help them. And something that I don't know that a lot of our stakeholders, but I know we do, don't always think about is our users don't think about what we build in terms of the legislation and the information architecture that we are developing the site under. They just want to find that page to get that task done. And number 10, are you using semantic code? I've seen an example for this. I've seen a lot. A developer or a designer will add JavaScript to a div to make it clickable. And it may work with the mouse. It may cause an action. And I'm going to show you this later in something that I myself have recently learned, is that clickable divs with JavaScript are not accessible. The screen reader will not notice them. The screen reader will not present that to its user in the list of items that I've shown you. Whereas buttons or links, actual A tags or actual button tags come with accessibility out of the box, and the browser already knows how to treat them. And the browser also does something else, which I'm going to show you. But the takeaway from this is no JavaScript clickable divs. Fake buttons don't or not rendered to something called the accessibility tree unless you're willing to put in the same level of work that Google has put into Chrome, or that Microsoft has put into Edge, or that Apple has put into Safari, or that Mozilla has put into Firefox. So, and I don't have an example of a clickable div, but I'm going to show you something in the next part of this relating to buttons. So semantic code means that assistive technology can rely upon it. Assistive technology knows what to do with it. It's also going to be more future friendly, which means less technical debt in the future. It means less stuff for our engineering managers to harp on us about. It also conforms to WCAG specifications. Now, here's something I recently learned about myself, something called the accessibility tree, also known as the accessibility object model, depending on who you're talking to. It is basically, it's like a DOM, but for assistive technology. So in our example site, which we've just been looking through, if we open this in the inspector, we usually see something like this. Here's our add to cart button, and it's this part here, which, it says add to cart and has the icon of a cart. So I've highlighted it here in the inspector. We can see all of our styling choices, and we can see everything that's in it. Well, here is the same add to cart button in the accessibility tree. This is the same markup, but it's rendered differently. On the left, this is our normal, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. This is our probably most frequently viewed part in the DevTools, which is the DOM. But here, the accessibility tree, which I'll show you how to get to this in a moment, shows everything on the page, but it presents it in terms of its role, its value, its name, and its state, and what it does. Oops. So I'm going to go to Chrome. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to right click on Add to Cart, I'm going to inspect it, and here's the button. I'm going to move this around, hopefully, so we can see the button. So here's our button. Great, I can see all my styles. But if I press accessibility here, then I get all of this. I get its ARIA attributes, I get all of its computed properties, I get all the ways that the browser calculates its name and its function. By the way, none of this happens for clickable divs. Well, Chrome is a feature. I can switch to the accessibility tree view. And so here's our button. It's a button. Its name is Add to Cart, which means voice control users can simply say, tap or click Add to Cart. And when voice control users press, or I'm sorry, say press Add to Cart or click Add to Cart, they would get this feature here, which shows their product being added to the cart. Well, we pull up the accessibility tree again. And where did I put that button? All right, so I think I lost the button. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, so here's Add to Cart. Here's its labels. Here's its name. Its role is a button. It does not allow invalid user entry. It's focusable, and right now it is actually focused. So all of this stuff shows that the assistive technology knows what's happening to a thing on the page if it is semantic HTML or if it has to be custom developed, that we have done all of the work necessary so that that thing presents itself in full to the accessibility tree. The accessibility tree runs parallel to the DOM. Here I have a diagram which starts off at the upper left as HTML and CSS. It's rendered into the DOM tree by the browser, and the browser uses that to paint the visual interface for us. But at the same time, the browser and the assistive technology work together to the browser does most of the work, to turn that DOM tree into the accessibility tree, which is presented, at least to a screen reader user, in terms of an audio and oral interface. I've changed the design in these slides to this dark background because I only just started learning about this myself like last week. So there's still things about this that I myself am still learning. So as we wrap up today's Lunch and Learn, and thank you for coming, I have some links here which I think will be very helpful to you. I'm going to call these out. We have a Pluralsight accessibility playlist. We have the W3C's WCAG 2.2 specification, which if it's not released today or next month, it should be released by the end of October, which means that will become the new standard that we're trying to reach. By the way, the DOJ, as in the Department of Justice, recognizes WCAG as the technical standard, and I've seen PDFs of court cases where the DOJ references the plaintiff in terms of WCAG violations. The DOJ also has current requests for comments because the DOJ is preparing opinions and rules which state that state and local government websites must be WCAG compliant and thus accessible. There's a Mozilla Developer Network, which has a lot of information. You have Google's web.dev. You have the federal government's 18F accessibility guide. And of course, we have Chrome, we have Google's article about the accessibility tree, and a few other slide decks that I've prepared that you can share with some of your non-technical coworkers, and accessibility checks for developers. Well, I'm sorry, these are for you. And I go into the 24 tests that the ICT testing baseline at section508.gov actually uses. I also have a deck for non-technical members of your team, things that they can do, such as tabbing around on their keyboard. And as you know, Pelican, we're really close to releasing version 2. We're doing our best to build accessible things into Pelican. And of course, if you're an iPhone user, you should get to learn VoiceOver. And if you're an Android user, there's something called TalkBack, which are screen readers for these mobile devices. And one of the reasons I'm recommending that you try these out for yourself is notice how the touch screen behaves differently when the screen reader is on. And that it really is sort of enlightening. It makes me think about my own design choices. Well, with that, I'll open up for questions if anyone has any. And I'll, yeah, okay, Eric. Oh, okay, let me go to Chrome. So in Chrome, I'm going to open the inspector. You may have to increase the width, especially of this right panel, and look for the accessibility tab. And there's a checkbox in there to enable the full page accessibility tree, which when that is checked, you see the accessibility icon, and when you press it, it's okay. Okay, sure thing. Dina? Yeah, it should be in the deck that I posted in the chat of this meeting. Oh, okay. Well, tell you what, I will email this out to you, Shauna, and you can distribute it among members of your team if anyone else has um, difficulty with this. I'm really glad you asked that question, Keisha. To answer your question, I'm going to address the part where you say clog up the screen readers. So one of the pieces of advice I keep reading from the professionals is that the more things on a screen, the more stuff the screen reader has to articulate to the user. And so if you need something, put it on there, but we have to be cognizant of how we're describing it in text or what we're naming it, because that's either longer or shorter spans of audio oral information that the screen reader user has to consume. But I think in what you're so going to the other part of what you're saying, you're still putting the navigation in that same spot. Now you may have user and permission dependent items in that navigation, and I think that's fine because the navigation itself is in the same page. And you may also not want certain users to be aware of permissions that other users might have. For example, we probably don't want, lower level users to know everything stakeholders can see for some reason or another. But I think the answer that I would give, and I haven't seen anything that contradicts the choices that you and your team have made, is you're still putting the navigation in the same spot. This one state agency just completely dropped the navigation on many internal pages. I had to go back to the home page to get to the navigation. Well, thank you for asking that because I'm glad you brought up the clogging thing. I guess if there are no other questions, I'll give you a few more seconds to speak up or forever hold your peace. I hope this has been somewhat enlightening. Um, Please, and again, please, if you are implementing Pelican and you discover places where there's errors, please, open up a pull request, or if you discover a better way of causing, or a better, more accessible way of implementing something, please. Pelican belongs to the people of Louisiana. We're just the ones who are using it the most right now. Yeah. We do, but I'm going to tell you, I've been terrible about checking that feedback form. So, and it's my fault. It's no one else's. It's Israel Duke's fault. But yeah, feel free to let me know whenever you submit something there. I'm not the only one who sees it, but right now I'm the only one who's checking it. So, and I'm sorry, Shauna. Oh, I think I did see that, by the way, now that you mention it. But yeah, I'm terrible about remembering to check that thing. I don't see why not. That's something I'll bring up with James. Or maybe if anyone else would like to learn how to implement search in 11D, um, none of us would have any problem with that. Stuff like that, this is where my own dev skills, I'm putting my dev skills in air quotes, begin to be a little lacking. Well, thank you, Dina. Well, everyone, thank you. Thank you for coming. Accessibility is important, and the more I learn about it, the more I come to realize that for some people, if a site is inaccessible, they cannot use it. So if they're trying to, say, apply for benefits at a government site, or get information on COVID at LDH, or sign up for something at OMB, or find out why OTS is using this or that tech stack, if the site is inaccessible, we are literally decreasing their quality of life. And I've even come to the conviction that if I know how to make something accessible but I don't, then I'm just a bad person and I don't want to be that way. Well, it's almost lunchtime, so again, thank all of you for joining and be accessible.